and we'll look at some important things. Lord, thank you for this day and for your love. Thank you for the weather and the seasons. You have sent them to us for a reason. They teach us so much and they impact our lives. We notice that as we're looking at the snow outside and the many people that are not able to travel today because of hazardous conditions. We pray for, Lord, those who are traveling, that they would continue to be safe wherever they are going this morning. And as we are here together, I'm grateful, Lord, for each one who has joined us in attendance, was able to come. It is a blessing, and help us as we gather together. We think of the requests that were made earlier. I won't mention them all by name right now on our time together, but I just pray that you would hear and care for each one. We pray that you would bless them. Bless us as we gather. We ask it in Jesus' wonderful, saving name. Amen. Go with me to Genesis chapter 8. After about 370 days, finally Noah is going to get off of the ark. And so I don't know if you're excited about that, but I think Noah and his family would have been excited about the idea of getting off the ark. And I'll think just for the purpose of reading, I'll start with verse 13, 8:13, and get some details. We mentioned last week that there are so many details related to the actual dates of occurrences on the calendar for the flood of Noah that it reads like a personal diary. And Moses is the one who wrote the book of Genesis, but there's nothing saying that he couldn't have used the diary of someone who would have passed down the dates to him. Or the other option would be, and it's a good one, the Lord could have just inspired him either one way or another. The Lord could have told him about it when he was up on Mount Sinai. So just different ways that this would have been included here. It could have been put into the Scriptures. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first day of the month, that the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and indeed the surface of the ground was dry. And so it's not just there so that we could know what Noah was doing, but the flood is over. And this is a part of history, the history of the world. We're supposed to know that. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. Notice again the details, very specific. Verse 15, and then God spoke to Noah, saying, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives, and bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and cattle, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth, and be fruitful and multiply. And so Noah went out, and his sons and his wife, and his sons' wives with him, every animal, every creeping thing, every bird, and whatever creeps on the earth according to their families went out of the ark. And then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma, and the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of a man's heart is evil continually from his youth. Nor will I again ever destroy every living thing as I have done, while the earth remains. And I want to highlight that for just a second. He doesn't say the earth will exist forever. That's a pretty important little statement here. That as long as the earth exists, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, day and night shall not cease. And I'm going to probably look at chapter 9, but we won't talk about that until after we talk about the details of chapter 8 for just a second. We see at the end of the account here that Noah has come out of the ark. Noah has been completely obedient to the commands of the Lord from beginning to end, which is absolutely wonderful. And the Lord was gracious to Noah, not because he was perfect in the sense of not sinning, but because he was righteous, because he had faith, because he walked with God, we're told in Genesis chapter 6. And so Noah is doing something really unique here in chapter 8. He is the hero. And by calling him a hero, I don't know if you've ever thought about it like this way, but Noah is essentially the second Adam. So Adam and Eve, they had their chance, their shot at impacting the world, and they did some good things, of course, and they did some bad things. And And so Noah is starting all over again. The world is starting over. He has an opportunity and a chance maybe to direct humanity from here on, because he is clearly, just as Adam was, Noah is the father of us all. He's obedient and he walked by faith, and hopefully his children also would do the same. It was my suggestion last week that even though the Bible doesn't tell us, I would assume that they use many of the utensils, many of the cages, many of the gates and lumber from the ark itself to build buildings and heat and build cages, whatever they needed to do as they were going out of the ark. And if you just think about it for a little bit, 20 years after the ark would have been the earliest that there could have been children, ready to leave home. So if all three of Noah's sons had children, the first year after the ark, then in 20 years they would be marriageable couples that maybe would be ready to wander off a little bit. Maybe they didn't wander that quickly, so let's give them 30 years. And as Gary would know, I've heard him talk about many of the studies. How long does it take for a forest to develop trees that can be cut? 30, 35, 40 years. When they clear cut, a little bit longer. So it would have taken that many years for the earth, the timber even to grow. So I think that they would have used many of the items on the ark. And it occurred to me last night, I bet they took tools with them. I'm like, oh, of course they need tools. Remember, we're told earlier in Genesis that the humanity was developing the ability to make metallurgy. They were developing iron and things like that. So they might have had saws. I think they probably did. Saws and axes and hammers and things that they would have taken. Can you imagine packing for the trip? Let's pack everything up and get ready to go, because a year from now, well, they didn't know how long, but we're going to need all these tools. I might need this. I might need this. I might need that along the way. And so Noah is clearly a hero, first of all, and we would acknowledge that. But the second thing that Noah is doing is Noah is functioning as a priest. I don't know if you've really thought about it this way, but before the law of Moses was established, who functioned as the priest within the tribes and families? It was always the father. So you see, during the time of Job, that Job was the priest for his family. And as the priest for his family, Job made sacrifices for his children, in case they'd sinned, that the Lord would be gracious to them, and he prayed for them. Of course, there's a lesson there for us, isn't there? That we ought to be praying for those who are under our care, both fathers and mothers and whatnot. But Noah is more than just being an intercessor for his immediate family. He's really being an intercessor, as we see what he's doing in chapter 8, for the whole world. He's, as this hero, as I've described him a little bit earlier, he is the one who is stepping up his game and recognizing that this terrible ordeal of a flood is not quite done yet. You probably thought it's all over and we can move on to new things. But the flood was an expression of the wrath of God, wasn't it? God was displeased with mankind and determined that he would destroy them. And so while God is angry and pouring out his wrath on humanity and killing all of them, we said this about Noah. Noah also deserved to die. Everyone does. The soul that sins, it shall die. Noah happened to be a sinner. It was grace, undeserved favor that God gave to Noah. And so Noah and his family, they're coming out of the ark, and they need an intercessor. They need someone to pray. And so what Noah is doing at the end of the flood is he's looking up to God and he's saying, I know that you've been angry. I know that you have poured your wrath out on all of humanity, but I want you to forgive us. I want you to forgive humanity and give us a second chance. And so what does Noah do? Well, he builds an altar. You'll notice in the text, the Lord told Noah to do this and do that and do this and do that. There's one thing that the Lord did not tell Noah to do, at least according to anything we have. He did not tell him to build an altar. And so his building of an altar was an act of voluntary free will. He was recognizing that things are still not right with the Lord, still not right with God. And so as your great-great-great-grandfather, Noah goes to the Lord and builds this altar to seek to make sure that we are right with God again. That God and his anger can be assuaged, that's ended or covered over, that things can turn to the right. And in chapter 9, I don't know if we'll get there yet this morning, but the Lord is going to make a promise to Noah. He's going to make a covenant with him. The promise that God made to Noah and all of humanity flows out of the fact that Noah brought sacrifices and looked to the Lord, and though we're not given the words that he spoke, that as Noah came to the Lord and asked for forgiveness and worshiped the Lord there together, the Lord entered into the Noahic covenant, a promise with Noah and all of his children. And so when I think of my Sunday school hour pictures, I had a children's Bible called Hurlbert's Story of the Bible. And it has a picture of Noah there, if I recall right. I haven't looked at it for 45 years, 55 years probably. It shows Noah there on the beach somewhere with the ark in the background, and he's got this little altar, not too much bigger than maybe this podium, and there's a sheep on it. What's wrong with that picture? Notice what it says that Noah offered as a sacrifice. He took from every clean animal, every clean bird that was there. And so I want you to think about the details and the effort that Noah would have had to put into making this sacrifice and pleading for God's mercy as he offered them together. Clean animals are those, according to the book of the law, animals that chew the cud and have a divided hoof. And it would include cattle, deer, goats, ox, sheep, hart, gazelle, roebucks, antelope, buffalo, caribou, elks, and moose, and ram, and reindeer. I think I said sheep already, got that one twice in the list there. And I don't even have all of them. So I just listed off, 18 or 20 different animals that are of clean animals. And then of clean birds, you have grouse, and guinea fowl, and partridge, and peafowl, and pheasant, pigeons, prairie chicken, quail, sparrows, teal, turkey, and the list goes on and on and on. What in the world? So how long would it take you to kill 50 animals at least? I mean, if I could think of 50 or ran into a list of 50 clean animals, there's probably 100. Probably a bunch of them. And you've never thought about that before, have you? I've never thought about that the size of this offering that Noah was making before the Lord was huge. And we don't have to worry about, killing off one of the species or one of the kinds, because that's why the Lord had them take 7 of all of the clean animals and 2 of the unclean animals. But the fact that he took them meant that he would still have opportunity in the future to make further sacrifices, right? So we don't know how often that they made sacrifices, but whenever they did occasionally, there would be more animals to be able to do that role. Remember, it says in Genesis chapter 4, and it came to pass in the process of time, or at the end of the days, that Cain brought a sacrifice to the Lord, and also Abel did. And we spent some time looking at that when we were in Genesis 4, and we said that word, in the process of time, actually refers to the end of days. It came to pass at a specific point they offered sacrifices. The suggestion that's in that language is there was a specific time they were supposed to offer regular and continual sacrifices. And so these 7 of the clean animals would have given them opportunity to make more and more sacrifices. So when Noah does this, it was glorious. It was huge. They would have been what the law refers to as whole burnt offerings. And the reason I would say that is there's only 8 people there, and no matter how hungry they were, they wouldn't be eating most of this sacrifice. Remember, we don't think about this terribly often, but in several of the Old Testament sacrifices, you gave a portion to the Lord that was burnt up in the smoke. You gave a portion to the priest, and then you took a portion home for your family. That's in many of them. But in the whole burnt offering, that specific offering, everything that was, appropriate to be burned, not everything within the entrails was burned, of course, but everything that was there was burnt up before the Lord. And so this is what he's doing, and he is making intercession for us. God, please forgive us. We're a bad group of people. We know that we have sinned along the way, and we want to be right with you again. And so when you come down to the text and you notice what it says that the Lord did, let me read that again. At verse 21, Genesis 8:21, and the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. And you almost ought to laugh at that, because as I was doing some reading on this 25 years ago, I never have forgotten this. I was looking at different opinions about what people thought. And the suggestions were, well, the Lord just likes the smell of barbecue, right? That one theologian actually said that. And of course, that's silly to say that along the way, though we would appreciate barbecue and roasted meat as it's being, roasted on an altar or in the oven, dinner, pot roast, whatever the case would be. I don't think that the Lord's smelling senses are the same as ours. And in fact, I wouldn't even say that there was any reason that physically the Lord smelled it and thought that that was just a nice aroma. This is we call it an anthropomorphism. That's a word you've heard before. You don't use it very often, but it's a good one. An anthropomorphism is the idea that you attribute to God the characteristics of humanity so that we could understand him. So I won't give you any list right here now, but you can imagine them. So what it's actually doing, it is attributing to the Lord the idea that he took pleasure in the offering. He took pleasure in the sacrifice. And so as you would take delight in a roast coming out of the oven with, you pull off the tin foil and it's there in the big pot and the smell just fills the house, or a turkey dinner. What does it do for you? It causes all that you are to be excited or to be moved with anticipation for the future. Dinner is coming, hopefully within a half hour or an hour. So when it says that the Lord smelled this offering, it meant that he was pleased in his inner being, that everything about him took delight in the fact that Noah made this grand, and you have to say that again, this gigantic sacrifice, and it moved him to be pleased with the people of God. Now, the people of God at this time are only Noah and his family, his sons and his wives, but it caused the Lord to take pleasure in us. Now, that's exactly what we should think about when we look at all of the sacrifices that we see in the Bible. This is not the first example of a sacrifice in the Bible. Remember what it said about Cain and Abel? That Cain made a sacrifice and the Lord wasn't pleased with it, but Abel made a sacrifice and the Lord took notice of it. The same thing as is being described here, that he was favorable towards it. And it suggests this, that just as the sacrifices in the Mosaic economy, the law of Moses, as the priest and the Levite, as they made their sacrifices before the Lord would look down and see the blood that was being shed there, and his heart and his life and his inner being would be moved. I think it's reasonable to say that. Would be drawn to a place where he now is looking favorable towards the person. Now, it doesn't mean that these animals were able to pay for sin. And these animals were not able to pay for sin, just as all of the lambs and the scapegoat of Leviticus chapter 16 and 17 and all of the animals that were ever shed, it doesn't mean they paid for sin. Because without the shedding of blood, it is impossible for there to be remission of sin. But the blood of bulls and goats never took away sin. So when we think of the Old Testament economy, what they were doing, the Old Testament period, I should say, they weren't actually trying to pay for sin as much as they were trying to show that they had faith in God, that they were looking towards God, and God delighted to forgive them and grant them forgiveness, not based on the animal, but based on what he knew he would do at the cross. And so it's essentially every every lamb and every bull that was offered, and these here that were offered, they were kind of like a check. You know, you write a check, and a check, frankly, it's just a piece of paper, and it has no value. If you get stuck in a snowstorm with a check, you can't eat it, you know, to have food. You can't really burn it to get warm. It doesn't do anything for you. It's a promise of something greater. And the promise of something greater is that at some point in the future, someone would come along and they would fulfill the promise of Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, that one of the seeds of the woman will destroy the serpent and will make things right again with God. So we ought to see in this grand sacrifice of Noah here in Genesis chapter 8, even an allusion or a pointing to the cross of Jesus Christ, because ultimately in the end what the Lord was doing and what he will do in the future is, because he is predisposed to have favor towards his children, he will look to the future, and as he looks to the future, he will recognize that that sin will be paid for by the Lord Jesus Christ. And what it essentially does is it expresses something about God that is really important. What it reveals about God here when the Lord smells these things again is it reveals what kind of a God do we have. Do we have a God who likes to walk around and keep lists of everything you ever did and always remember your sinfulness and always trying to anticipate, I'm going to get him one day? Or do we have a God who is approachable, who is willing to receive us, who is eager to be restored with us, who will accept something? And let me say this again. However big the sacrifice of Noah was, it wasn't big enough for the righteous demands that God would have. But he accepted it. He received it. He was predisposed favorably towards Noah and his sacrifice, not because of any kind of specific righteousness in the gift, but because of the heart of God. The heart of God is predisposed to welcome you into his presence when you come to him. And so think about it like this. Let's say the next time that you sin, and each of us will sin, no doubt, before the day is over, and we go to the Lord, and we want the Lord to be favorable for us. We quote 1 John 1:9. We're thankful for what he does. And he is more willing for us to come into his presence than we are to go into his, because that is the kind of God that we have. Now, when I think about that, and I'm looking down here at Noah the hero and Noah the priest, I want you to know what the Lord did because of how favorable he was towards Noah. So let's read verses 21 and 22 again. Genesis 8:21, and the Lord smelled the soothing aroma. Again, it isn't just that he smells the way we do, but he was pleased with it. And then the Lord said in his heart. Now, this isn't something he's saying to Noah. This isn't something he's speaking out loud. This is something he's saying to himself. And you could call this a divine soliloquy, if you will. A soliloquy is a way for people to express their heart. You know, Shakespeare used it as he wrote different stories and plays. The person in the play might step aside and he's just going to think something, but he has to express it audibly or we won't know. And so what this is doing here is the Lord said to himself, this is what he determined, but he wants us to know that it's true, that this is important. The Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Now, you need to stop and look at the word curse in verse 21, Genesis 8:21. The word curse is used there, and it reminds us of what chapter in the Bible? Genesis chapter 3, where the serpent was cursed and the ground was cursed. It almost sounds, if you are just an English reader, that the Lord is removing the curse off of the ground. But that's not really the case here. Because when it says, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, this is a different word for curse. And so if you were a Hebrew reader or if you were translated in a different language, you would catch the difference. What he's saying here is he will never again diminish or bring low to the ground for man's sake. So he doesn't remove thorns and thistles as we see it in Genesis chapter 3. He doesn't remove the idea that Adam is going to have to work from the sweat of his brow, and basically the ground is like this huge magnet that's always trying to pull Adam back into the ground. That's essentially what life is in some ways. It's like we're always trying to beat gravity. You get old, what finally begins to beat you? The older you get, the more gravity takes over, and pretty soon you can't get off the bed, and then pretty soon you're laid in the ground because the earth won. The earth is doing that. That's not the point here. What he is saying, instead of that, is whatever blessings are capable with the earth, they will continue for the rest of humanity, for the rest of time. And so the Lord isn't giving them a do-over and say, okay, it's all good now. We still have thorns. We still have death. But it will never get any worse. And so because of what Noah did in offering the offering here, the Lord responds by offering grace to humanity. Now let's notice the grace in verse 21. So the Lord smelled, again, the soothing aroma. The Lord said in his heart, I will never again diminish, put low the ground for man's sake, although, and here it is, and this is one of the 2 or 3 key texts in the whole Bible about human depravity. There's one in chapter 6, and there's one here. You can think of Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. You can think of Ecclesiastes chapter 7, there is not a just man on the earth who does right and doesn't sin. This is one of the best, maybe the greatest. Here's how bad it is. And the Lord is saying, even though they kick me in the shins, even though they're not going to learn their lesson, that's really the point here, even though they're still sinners, that for the rest of existence of mankind, while the earth remains, from verse 22, here's what they're going to be like. Although the imagination of a man's heart is evil, even from his youth. Now, this is an addition to chapter 6. In chapter 6, the Lord said, I noticed that their imagination is always evil. It's like a gun that's not calibrated, or a gun with a bent sight. Whenever you aim at something, it always misses. That's the point. The imagination of humanity is twisted. And the Lord is adding one more detail to it, that they're even twisted when they're kids, from their youth up. And you would think that the Lord would say, well, if you're going to keep playing this way, then I'm going to wipe you off the earth again. And the Lord is saying, I will never do this again. Even though depravity is still there, I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. And so then he offers up a remedy, and the remedy is in verse 22. And while the earth remains, there will be seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, day and night, they shall not cease. And so I want you to think about verse 22 with me for just a little bit. As significant as it is, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. As you notice it here, that there are going to be changes in the world around us. And the suggestion is that the seasons are good for mankind. I don't know if you've ever thought of, it's a little bit hard to wake up on a Sunday morning and see the snow and recognize that it's going to impact everything we do throughout the rest of the day, and say, how in the world could this all be good for us? And maybe, I don't know, you can probably think of ways that it is, but he's going to say that there are several things that remain while the earth remains. And I highlighted that again. And I need to answer a specific question. When the Lord says he'll never destroy the earth again with water, people often come back and say, but but he's going to do it with fire, right? 1st and 2nd Peter, the elements will melt with fervent heat. Isn't the Lord lying? And I would just remind you what it says here. It doesn't say that forever the seasons will be here. It will be here as long as the earth remains, which implies something else, that it won't go on forever, that there is an end to all of this. And part of the delight or the pleasure that would be found in the heart of God would be this. this won't go on forever. It's the same account, the same thing that we would say is, why did God restrict Adam and Eve from eating from the tree of life? They had already eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and it says at the end of chapter 3, unless they take their hand and eat from the tree of life, and then there's a dash there, and it's kind of like the thought of God, and his mind just trails off. He puts the angels there to keep them away from the tree of life. The point is, if they had eaten from the tree of life, they would have existed forever in their sinful state. And we would remind ourselves, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it goes into the ground, it becomes something better. The Lord knew that Adam and Eve needed to go through the valley of the shadow of death to enter into all that they could be as new creation people. And the same thing is found here in verse 28, when it says, as long as the earth remains, these things will be here. So the Lord in his heart is saying, I'm going to put up with your sinfulness and the fact that your imagination is evil for a time, but I have something better planned in the future. And that's all bound right there in that first statement of 22, while the earth remains. That a day will come when we'll get out of this, and then the Lord knows, though he doesn't express it, and depravity will be no more. Now it's interesting, when he describes these things, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, day and night, they shall not cease. It tells us something about what he's going to do for mankind. He's going to force them into a new kind of existence. Seed time is what? People always used to ask me when I was farming, did you enjoy planting season or harvesting season better? And at different times, every farmer would say something different. If you're a gardener, maybe you could say, do you like planting your garden or do you like harvesting your garden? And you would say, well, they're both delightful, but in different ways. The point of it is now they're going to have to do it. Now they're going to have, as the Proverbs say, you have to get up early in the morning and plant your seed. Ecclesiastes says the same thing. And if you don't do it, if you don't put your seed in the ground, you're not going to get a harvest. So the Lord is occupying, keeping busy humanity. Because the earth has changed and because the seasons are going to be there, we're going to have to plan for winter. Like squirrels, they gather nuts, and not every animal out there plans for, the fall season, but they do. We're going to have to do exactly the same thing. And so the fact that there's going to be seed time and harvest, the Lord is saying that I'm going to make sure that these people keep busy, because what are empty hands? Grandma used to, not my grandma, but somebody's grandma, I don't know who it was actually. Empty hands are what? A devil's workshop. And I remember, grandma, not mine, again, it's just hypothetical, but it would be sewing and knitting, because empty hands are the devil's workshop. That's the point here. You're going to have to work for a living and plan. You're going to have to sew. You're going to have to look for skins. You're going to have to cut wood. You're going to have to insulate your house, all of these things, because seed time and harvest are coming, but also cold and heat. And so there's a second way in which they're going to have to keep busy, and they're going to have to face winter and summer, and then they're going to have to face day and night. And so for each of these, there is an occupation or a busyness that the Lord forces this new humanity into, so they don't sit around the fire and think of everything dumb that they could do in life. They're going to have to keep busy. But there's also a reminder that if I put seed in the ground, even though some years are better than other years, what's going to happen? Harvest will come. Can you imagine that? You remember what the Psalm says? They that go sowing in tears shall reap in joy. Weep or reap in joy at the same time. The point is, the father would be there and he'd have an opportunity sitting on a bag of seed. Should I feed my children the seed, or should I put it in the ground? He might split it up between the two of them. But if you feed your children all of the wheat seed and you don't put any in the ground, you won't have a future harvest. And the point in all of that is we need to anticipate those things. And so the Lord is giving to humanity a new job, if you will, new activities to plan for day and night and winter and summer, cold and heat and seed time and harvest, and a new promise to say, that even though some years will be better than other years and some years will be worse than others, you never have to fear that I won't care for you. The Lord will continue to care and meet the needs of people to the end of time. And it does one more thing, and I need to be done with this morning. This is where I'll end my lesson. Not only do these new seasons, I believe that the earth was changed in its orbit in terms of, I don't understand all the details, but the way that the tilt of the earth would have been, so that, in the summer you have more direct sunlight and everything. Not only is there a new occupation or a new busyness, new responsibilities, I would say. The earth isn't going to produce like it did before, but no more will he diminish it. Secondly, there is the promise that it will be okay. But thirdly, there is a lesson in the seasons. And the lesson in the seasons is, well, I'll give you the opposite and then you'll understand. We lived in California for 5 years, from 1992 to 1997. We're going to seminary, and when we were out there, we found that there were not seasons. So you had rain and sunshine. And I remember specifically up on the hills of Burbank, California, on Christmas Day, Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, one of the two for sure. It was about 70 degrees and nice, and I thought, my whole life could go flying by, and I might not even notice the difference. And so the point is when you go through the seasons, you recognize. I remember last winter, and we talk about last summer and the summer before and the winter of 1997. I always hear these different stories about everything, snowstorms and whatnot. These are the ways that the Lord teaches us to do what was said in Psalm 90. So teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. If life just flies by and you don't recognize that there's, Sunday does that for us too. Sunday is a demarcation. It's the beginning of the week, or we feel like it's the end of the week, but it shows us that a week has gone by. I'll never get that week again. The spring will come, and we'll think of a new year, and it gives us wisdom to enter into the fact that sooner or later, my life will go by, and I need to use and invest my life for the Lord before it's too late. If we didn't have seasons, people move north sometimes, they just miss seasons. One of the things it does for us is it teaches us to number our days. So very interesting. I meant to go into chapter 9, but that's just fine. Just the fascinating aspect of Noah. What was he? He was certainly a hero, a very obedient man. Noah was a high priest praying for all of his children. Noah was praying for you and for me that day, that the Lord would be gracious to us. And what did the Lord do? The Lord answered Noah's prayers of worship when he was offering those sacrifices, made them promises. The Lord took delight in the sacrifice, promised he would never again do what he did just recently. We never have to fear. And he made the world a little bit better for us with the seasons so that we could enjoy our lives until we go and be with the Lord. And so a fascinating account as the first family gets off of the ark. Any comments, questions, helpful criticisms? That's all good. Go ahead, and then we'll go Gary and then Tim.
Where were the angels this time that corrupted flesh to flesh? They're in chains, right?
Do you say where were they?
Yeah, the angels that came into the women in chapter 6, and they were, I believe, tried to corrupt all of them.
Oh, okay. Well, they would have been locked in Tartarus. They would have been cast into the pit.
So could that be why and their flesh would not be corrupted because they were locked up?
Oh, I see. So they have a new protection from evil attacks of the enemy?
Or Satan, I believe Satan tried to destroy the lineage of the Messiah.
Sure. It very well could be. I mean, those are in the area of things we're not told all of that, but it certainly would have played into it. Yeah.
But they are in chains, right? They're in chains now.
The ones who are in chains, yep. I think the word hell there is Tartarus. It's a different word for hell. It refers to like a deep, dark, gloomy pit. And so when the demons who were in the Legion, remember the man named Legion? Are you going to don't send us to the pit early. They didn't want to go there. They recognize that's a bad place to be. So, yeah, very interesting. Yeah, all plays into the story. Go ahead, Tim. Would they have done what yet? Oh, they were there a year. I don't know. I've never heard anyone comment. Or what do you think? They could have been. I'm assuming that the animals would have been kept in pens together. You know, the male and female of the species. So. Right. Very well could be, yeah. Teenagers of the animal kind. Interesting. Yeah, they certainly had to get busy and have some children, didn't they? Some babies. So